All right. Thank you so much for having me today. Anastasia invited me to talk about international hiking trips. A lot of, or most of what I have to say also applies to domestic trips or domestic travel as well. Does my screen look good?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. So why would you consider international travel for hiking? Well, I'm sure as many of you know, it can yield unique and life-changing experiences. You can experience natural beauty, diversity of terrain and scenery, extremes in temperature and terrain, as well as unusual wildlife. You can also, at the same time or as part of the same trip, experience art and architecture, music, food, and other cultural aspects. You can also learn a lot about history and technology by traveling, as well as meeting people with varied backgrounds that you would not encounter in the United States. And as part of your travel, both within your hiking group and the people that you meet, you can make new friends and strengthen or make new connections. So there are several options in choosing or planning trips. The easiest is probably to choose from offerings that you can find commercially. You can also work with providers to request a custom trip. And I've found that some small operators can provide really exceptional service and at the same time be less expensive than larger commercial operators. Another option is to plan a trip yourself. That provides you with more flexibility. You can choose the companions that you travel with, but at the same time, it's much more time consuming and has some other limitations that I'll be talking about. So today, in planning a trip, I'll talk about the types of trips that you might consider, how to decide where you want to go, when you want to go, choosing between a guided commercial package versus your self-guided trip, as well as other considerations for international travel. And at the end, I'd like to open it up for not only questions, but to hear from all of you about your own experience and recommendations in planning and performing travel. So as far as the types of trips, I've classified them as falling broadly into focusing on nature or culture or testing yourself with physical challenges. But most trips end up being a combination of all of these. But it's important to think about what you want your primary focus to be. So I often love to see broad vistas of scenery and experience unusual wildlife, learning about geology, unique geology in certain areas. But at the same time, culture can add enormously to the experience when you're not on the trail. So these are some pictures from my travels in Italy and Japan. And it's really amazing, some of the architecture and learning about the history of different areas. It can be a life-changing experience. Some of you may be more interested in physical challenges, whether it's climbing on rocks or backpacking. testing your endurance at higher altitudes or temperature extremes. So again, like I said earlier, most trips end up being a combination, but it's important to think about what you want your focus to be. As far as where to go, that can be dictated not only by what you want to see, but you have to think about which country or region you're interested in. Some people have more interest in one area or one country than another. You want to think about whether your adventures should be in the mountains exclusively for hiking and climbing, or do you want to hike in the mountains with vistas of shorelines, or do you want more landlocked vistas? Some people might be interested in combining hiking with biking or kayaking or canoeing. So you may be interested in trips that involve lakes or rivers or even the ocean. If you're more interested in cultural aspects, you would want to combine this with some towns or cities potentially for cultural walks with tour guides that can tell you more about the history and the authentic experiences of local life, or food tours, cooking classes in combination with your hiking trip. And of course, wherever you go, you want to consider whether you're comfortable with the environment with regard to safety. There may be some countries that you want to cross off the list because they may have political unrest or crime levels that you're not comfortable with. The same for medical access. If you are not comfortable with a very, very rural environment where you may have difficulty accessing medical services in the event of an emergency or other situation, there may be certain vaccinations that are needed in advance of your trip, depending on where you travel. And some people may desire or require access to internet connectivity or telephone connectivity if it's essential for them to stay in contact for either work or family or other reasons. So deciding when to schedule a trip you want to consider a number of factors. Weather can vary enormously during the year depending on location. So that's certainly one important aspect. There may be special events or holidays in the country or the city that you're considering. So it may be more crowded at certain times of the year. You may be interested in seeing flower blooms or fall colors that only occur at certain times of the year. Cost and availability can vary depending on these factors above, as well as other factors. And then there are also the insects and wildlife considerations that can vary by time of year. And if you're still working or have other constraints, those will also impact, of course, when you're available to go. So weather could involve rain, snow, heat, high humidity, which can not only affect your comfort during the trip, but your safety as well. Some of the roads may be closed at certain times of the year, either scheduled closings or due to unexpected flooding or snow or ice. But to some extent, you can predict this in advance and schedule your trip around it. If you're interested in snow, then you would, of course, do that when the season is coldest. So cost is affected by a number of factors. One is exchange rate with the country that you're planning to go to. If you're considering package deals, there may be discounts on early purchases or last minute purchases. Airfare will depend on the cities that you're departing from, and whether you want nonstop or are able to accommodate connecting flights. Ground transportation, both to your departure airport in the US as well as from your landing place to where the trip is actually going to start, is an important consideration. And then the cost will vary for a trip depending on when it's most popular for tourists to go. And you generally will find cheaper packages during the slow seasons. So here's an example of how the exchange rate can affect the cost of a trip. In Europe, over the last 5 years, the high was in 2022, and since then, the dollar will buy 20% less today than it would in 2022. Conversely, for Japan, compared to 5 years ago, the dollar has improved by almost 50%. So Japan, if you were ever considering a trip to Japan, now is a good time to go because the dollar is very strong relative to their currency. And with Iceland, again, the dollar was strongest in 2022 over the last 5 years, but has since come down 20%. So Iceland is 20% more expensive now than it was 3 years ago. In addition to cost, availability can also affect when you are able to go or when it's best to go. There may be seasons when the trails are not open. For example, I just went to Yellowstone a week ago, and the park is closed to outside traffic. But if you work with a concession that provides services, you can get into the park. And I was able to stay in a yurt camp there to snowshoe during the winter. There may be local events or religious events such as the Olympics or local celebrations that may make travel at certain times very busy, and you would need to book in advance if you're interested in being there around that time. I've found that especially in my travels in both Japan and Italy, some accommodations and other things are not accessible online. You'd never know about them or may not be able to make reservations online. So you may have to work with a local tour operator to find out about those things and make a reservation. There also may be permits that are required for hiking or camping in certain areas. And as far as camping goes, if you were interested in backpacking, you would need to consider the availability of fuel and other supplies. So pests and other disease carriers can really make a trip miserable. For example, mosquitoes can be unbearable in Alaska and Canada at certain times of the years. There are black flies, midges. So you may want to plan your trip around avoiding the worst times for those kinds of pests. In some countries, you might even be worried about encountering bed bugs or rats. You may need to make special plans for food and trash containment. And in some cases, you may need to consider having bear spray to protect yourself. So these are other considerations to think about. So I think a common question that we all wonder about is whether a tour operator is worth the cost or whether you could plan a trip yourself. Well, in my experience in international travel, I have found that tour operators, in my opinion, have always been well worth the cost involved. They can find better prices than you might be able to find on your own. They have local knowledge of not only the language, which can be a lifesaver if there's a medical emergency or other problems. But they also are familiar with the trails. They know about the conditions of weather, whether there's risk of flooding or actual flooding, things like that. And they're also familiar with activities and events of interest in the area. They know about accommodations that may not be apparent to you. They know about which restaurants to recommend, where to get food and supplies, how to arrange ground transportation. And in the event of a medical situation, they can help find access to medical services. And I had a trip to the Italian Alps in July last year, and our guide told us that we had to skip one of our planned hikes because there was a high risk of electrical storms up on the mountain that day. And the tour operator had to scramble and arrange for 3 hours of bus and train rerouting around the mountain to get to our next hut. So that kind of knowledge is really invaluable in a situation where you need to make plan changes during the trip. If you do work with a tour operator, it's important to understand what they're offering and see if it meets your requirements, and to be as specific as possible in describing what activity levels you're interested in, how challenging, how many miles, how much elevation gain. Are there certain aspects? If you're asking them to design a custom trip, what kinds of features, whether it's scenery or wildlife or flowers or terrain, that you're most interested in, so that they can do the best job for you. If you decide to plan a trip yourself, there are many sources of information that you can refer to. There are, of course, many travel guidebooks. There are websites. Some of these focus more on hiking than than culture and tourism. And I found that the best advice is often to ask locals if you have that opportunity and the language skills in the country that you're visiting about trails and restaurants and events that are going on at the time. So there are lots of other details to think about. Trip insurance is often recommended. The most important aspect of this, in my opinion, is to provide insurance for medical transport if something were to happen where you need to be returned to the US on a special flight with medical transport. That could be enormously expensive. There are other types of insurance that can reimburse cancellation fees. If your trip has to be canceled for certain reasons, they can reimburse for airfare, the trip itself, lost luggage, things like that. So it's worth considering if you don't already have an annual trip insurance plan. It's important to have your own contingency plan for medical emergencies. You should have an emergency contact here in the US that you can provide contact details to your tour operator, as well as providing details to your contact here in the US in case anything happens. I feel strongly that it's important for everybody to have a will and a healthcare directive, regardless of whether they're traveling or not. But these are invaluable if anything were to happen while you're traveling. So airline and ground transportation logistics, we talked a little bit about earlier, but you also need to understand that you may want to carry on or wear your boots, bring some medications and other essentials in case your luggage is lost. It's a rare occurrence, but it does happen. And on at least one of my trips, the person's luggage was delayed for several days, and she had to wear the sandals that she wore on the plane hiking until her luggage was delivered a few days later. Be a good idea to have exact addresses for where you will be staying at hotels during the trip. In case your bags are delayed, the airline, you can tell the airline exactly where to deliver them to. If you're planning a trip that goes hut to hut or other accommodations where you want to have or where you will need to resupply, you need to think about logistics of how you would arrange for those supplies deliveries or otherwise obtain them. And like I mentioned, if you're going hut to hut and weather delays or impedes your progress, you need a contingency plan to make it to the next hut or make some other arrangements. You also want to think about dietary restrictions if you have any strong preferences or requirements. So paying for a trip, usually you can pay a tour operator with a credit card, or by currency exchange using a company called Wise. They serve as an intermediary to transfer dollars to foreign currency in other countries. As far as cash goes, I usually exchange currency at an ATM in the country that I'm going to, but I've learned that there are some ATMs that are kind of scams, and they try and trick you into accepting a very high fee that they use some tricky language when you're trying to get currency from the ATM, and they ask you if you want to accept that or if you want to let your bank do the exchange calculations. So you have to be a little bit careful there. The other option is to work with a bank before you leave here in the US if they are able to exchange money and give you currency to take with you. The disadvantage there is if you don't get enough, then you'll still need to go to a bank or ATM in the country that you're visiting to get more cash if you need it. And not all ATMs or banks in other countries will be able to accommodate you. I don't know if they accept US cash. I think usually credit card is the best, or debit card is the best option as far as getting cash outside the US. But if any of you have other insights, I'd be interested in hearing about your experience. You will need some cash if you plan on tipping your guides. And in my experience, we always give the guides a tip because their performance, in my experience, has always been phenomenal and well worth it. You may also need cash for shopping or restaurants if it's not included in your tour package. In some countries or some areas, the smaller businesses may not accept credit cards, and you may need cash. So of course, you will need your passport for re-entry as well as leaving the US and entering other countries. In many countries, they may require that your passport not expire within the 6 months after your trip is expected to end. So you need to be careful about that. Also, when you are considering a trip, you need to think about your compatibility with others. Are you able to share a room with someone else that you may or may not know, or do you require single bedroom lodging? And when you think about planning your trip, consider the change in time zone as well as possible differences in altitude and whether you might want to go a few days early to acclimate yourself to either the time zone or the altitude or both. So I have a standard packing list that I use, and I modify it somewhat depending on the season, but you always want to pack as light as possible. In many countries, the vehicles are smaller than here in the US, and the accommodations are often much smaller than you would find in typical US hotels. Also, some of the accommodations don't have an elevator, so you may end up walking up one or two flights of stairs with your luggage. In order to pack light, you may want to wash your clothes while you're on the road, and either bring some detergent or use shampoo for that purpose. Make sure you bring your medications, electrical adapter. In other countries, the plugs are different. And you will most likely need to check your bag if you're bringing hiking poles, and certainly if you have a knife or liquids or gels that are larger than what is allowed in carry-on luggage, as well as other equipment like microspikes may not be able to carry on. If you're backpacking, you'll most likely need to either buy or rent your fuel, find sources for food and water there, and if bear spray is recommended, that would certainly need to be acquired locally. So this is an adventure. All the points that I went over may make it seem complicated, but as they say, life is short, and my perspective is it's better to travel now and not put it off. So I encourage you to just do it and take the first step, start planning your travel. You might find a perfect package for you when you start looking, or you can take your time and build something. Whatever you do, if you decide to travel outside the US or in the US, take time to enjoy the moment and try to be flexible. It's a learning experience and an adventure. It can be fun, exciting, sometimes scary, but well worth the effort. And like I said, you'll meet new people, make new friends, strengthen connections, and hopefully have a lot of fun and excitement. So Anastasia is planning a trip to Sicily, and she asked me to let you know that if you have questions or would like to suggest future trips, please reach out to her, and this is her email address. So with that, I'll open it up, see if anybody has any questions, but I'd like to hear your experience if you have other insights to share with me and the rest of the audience.
Hey, Phil, this one quick question. When you travel outside the US, how did you find guides that you felt were competent and capable?
I was fortunate to be invited to join some trips a few years ago, and I met the guides that way by trips that other people had organized. In some cases, these guides had worked for Rhodes Scholar, otherwise known as Elder Hostel, in the past, and had set out to do their own, either create their own company, or in one case, the guide in the US went with us as a friend, and we gave her a tip as a gift without actually contracting with her. But that's how I've learned about guides, was by word of mouth or by experience on other trips. And then I subsequently worked with those guides to set up new trips.
Bill, I'm thinking about a trip this summer to Alaska for hiking, and I wonder if you have any recommendations.
Oh, God, yes.
Where to go?
I don't have any experience with Alaska, so I couldn't recommend a particular tour operator or places to go. Sorry.
I would, if I may, um, Wrangell St. Elias National Park. It's the largest national park in the United States, and there are only two ways to get in, either the mail plane, and the first time I went, the mail plane was literally just a piper, and it was the pilot and myself and all the U.S. mail. And we go into McCarthy and distribute the mail to the folks that come down twice a week for their mail. And the other thing, I mean, I've done a 4-day base camp backpack there. I've done an 8-day backpack there. They have also day trips like ice climbing and glacier walks and stuff. It's a really phenomenal place. But as I say, you can only get in on the Mail Plane or the McCarthy Road, which I was always told is totally unpaved. I finally drove it in 22, and it is partially paved. Well, it's asphalt in some places and otherwise hard pack. It wasn't bad at all.
Well, that sounds like a real adventure.
Well, yeah, I've done several in Alaska.
So more generally, Phil, I know a lot of, or a number of people in our chapter in our club have been on Road Scholar trips. Are there other of the more established outfitters that you would recommend?
No, I don't have any experience myself with other outfitters. I've heard other people speak complimentary about, I think it's Back Roads,
They're expensive.
but I haven't had my experience myself.
Okay. So I've been on trips that have been organized by the Sierra Club, including a wonderful trip on a boat in Alaska. REI has a very active
No longer.
trip. No?
No.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't know that. They took me to the bottom of the Grand Canyon and back, which was a wonderful trip.
So,
Um,
so I mean,
there are other organizations that that I at least have had a good experience with.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
this is
they-
I actually just came back Monday. I was in the Argentina side of Patagonia for a week, and I used back roads. It's my second trip with back roads, and I did 3 other trips with Trek Travel. Some cycling, and now Trek Travel is doing hiking and walking as well. And I mean, the tour groups, are, I mean, they're top notch. I'm staying in hotels versus huts, which is, kind of my preference. But, as Phil said, they do a wonderful job in working with the local guides so that you get the culture and you get a great sense for the area that you're in and the language. So, I mean, they're a different kind of trip, but very well done. And in each day, what was nice about the back roads, and Trek does this too, is you usually have multiple options. So they have an easy, a medium, and more challenging options, ranging from 3 miles a day to 5 to 10 miles a day with a lot of elevation change. So depending what you're capable of and perhaps what you're looking for on that particular day, um, you have options. And for me as a solo traveler, what I appreciate about it is that the majority of your dinners and lunches are together. So if you're a solo traveler, it's not like you're trying to find a restaurant by yourself. I mean, you're with the rest of the group. And even if you're a couple going on it, you wouldn't sign up for this kind of trip if you weren't looking to be with other people. So they did really. I just came back. I had a wonderful time in Patagonia.
Bill? Bill?
Yeah, hi, Marion.
Hi. A question about the local guides. When you tip them, um, I'm using the same local guides you use with Sherry Bennett and April. Do you tip them with cash or as a group? How does that work? I want to bring enough cash to tip. So how does that usually work?
Yeah, we tip in cash, and we've done it as a group. So on on the trips that I've been on, we pooled our money together. We agreed on how much we wanted to tip the guides, and everybody was pretty consistent. And then we got a nice card. Sometimes locally, we would find a nice artist blank card and write messages on that to go along with the cash and give it to the guide.
Is it a percentage of the cost of the trip, or is it a number that everyone agrees on?
It's a little bit of both.
Okay.
Yeah. I can't remember offhand how we did that calculation, but something like that.
Okay. Thank you.
If I can offer a couple of websites that I've learned to use a bit over a couple of years of international travel. One is Rome to Rio, which used to be much better before Expedia took over, but basically it will tell you how to get from point A to point B and give you all your options, whether you want to go by taxi or if you want to go by train or if they're buses or they're planes. And so I usually use that as a starting point to plan my trips. And the one I discovered this last spring is something called Bounce that I have since used. It's really helpful where you can stow your luggage for a day. And it's usually like when I was in Normandy and Brittany, we stored it in a dry cleaners. When I was in Pompeii last year, I you don't know exactly where you'll know the location, but not the actual what type of location it is, I guess because they don't want you to just go and drop off on your own. They want you to use the service. But the second one was a hotel in Pompeii and within walking distance of the train station. So, your luggage is guaranteed to be safe there. And so I really enjoyed that.
Wow, that sounds great. Thank
And
you.
the other thing, you may want to also, I don't know if you've ever used STEP, which is
No.
the federal government's, let's see, it stands for Smart Traveler Enrollment Program. So you just tell
Oh,
the
yeah.
the government that you'll be in France for X number of days, and they'll tell you if there are any um, things
Warnings.
happening that you want to avoid.
Yeah,
And
that's
if,
right.
yeah,
Yeah, if you enroll in that, they'll send you an email or a message letting you know if there's any warnings for the location that you're going to.
yeah.
Thanks for bringing that up. Good idea.
And then just real quickly, HF Holidays is a British travel company I've used several times. And like Backroads, they have different options each day and they stay in hotels.
Yeah, I've heard of that. Thank
Yeah,
you.
and then I also use Adventure Travel that the AMC has.
Right. Yeah, I think AMC is doing international travel again now,
Oh,
right?
they're doing a lot.
Yeah.
And what I discovered the hard way is REI, when they had their program, they used to sublet to local contractors, and charged you an exorbitant fee on top of the locals.
Mhm.
Other questions or comments?
Real quick again, with regard to the airline and in event one loses one's luggage. So, Phil, do you let the airline know prior to your flight where you'll be staying, or is it just something that you notify them once if your luggage is lost? You mentioned letting them, giving them the address of your
Yeah.
destination.
No, I don't think they would know what to do with that information in advance.
Okay.
I just passed that along because somebody told me that they were on a trip where luggage was delayed and um, the guide didn't know the exact address of the hotel, so they had to scramble and find the address in order to guide the airline in delivering the luggage.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Well, Phil, thank you very much. for a very informative presentation. Lots of good things to think about as we contemplate international travel. And we really appreciate your being with us tonight.
My
Thank you.
pleasure. Thanks to
Thank you.
everybody that had other ideas to share.
Thank you very much.
So I think that concludes our meeting tonight. Thank you again, everybody, for joining us. And we will see you in May, if not before, on the trails.
Thank you.